Just a few days from now, Delhi will host the G20 Summit. The capital city is busy dressing up for the big event. Then there can be no better time to ask some basic questions about the group of 20. What is the actual role of the G20? What is the real purpose of a G20 summit? Who is it really for? Let's dig deep and find out. Thank you for tuning in. This is Nadim, you're watching Empire Diaries. On 9th and 10th September, more than 12,000 top delegates from 100 countries will be in Delhi for the G20 summit. Joe Biden, Xi Jinping, Rishi Sunak, Emmanuel Macron will be here with Mohammed bin Salman, Justin Trudeau and many others. There will be top officials from the World Bank, IMF and the UN, and also from the European Union, World Trade Organization and the WHO. Now, G20 summits have been taking place annually since 2008. The Pragati Maidan in Delhi will host the 18th edition. In all these years, what has the group of 20 achieved for the people of the world? To understand this, let's first see what the G20 itself is. See, it's an international platform of the world's 19 biggest economies plus the European Union. The G20 nations cover 80% of the global economic output and 75% of the international trade. The narrative we are told is this. Responsible countries came together after the 1997 Asian financial crisis. They formed the G20 in 1999. What was their objective? To stabilize the global economy and to solve urgent problems. Well, their mission is like a James Bond movie, to make the planet a better place to live in. Sustainable development, better income distribution, justice, peace, climate change mitigation. These are some of the things that G20 summits are supposed to tackle. But after 17 highly expensive G20 summits, where does the world stand today? Not in a good place, not at all. 40% of all food around the world today is wasted. Only 60% makes it to the table. The richest 10% of the world population gets 52% of the global income. The richest 10% owns 76% of all wealth. There's more. 770 million people have no access to safe drinking water. Africa is still the most exploited continent. The world's 10 poorest countries are all African. Some of the world's biggest grain exporters are teeming with hungry people. America's gun problem is still out of control. China is rising, but it still has no democracy. Migration is an embarrassing problem. Racism and white supremacy are rising. So is right-wing politics in Europe. There are 872 million undernourished people on the planet. At the same time, there are 1.75 billion overweight people. There is more misery around us. Nearly 30,000 people are dying every day due to hunger. This year alone, 5.3 million people died from cancer. Almost 7 lakh people committed suicide in 2023. Climate change is often debated, but car companies and oil companies are still doing good business, and monopolies are muscling out small businesses. That's a long list of things gone wrong while the G20 held flashy summits in beautiful cities. In Washington, London, Paris, Osaka, Brisbane, Rome, and where not. And now in Delhi. Clearly, G20 summits are not delivering the goods. Summits are happening, venues are changing, but the miseries remain the same. So what is wrong with the G20? What are we missing here? Here's the truth. The G20 is like a wolf in sheepskin. It is a grouping that is actually controlled by the G7 countries. And what is G7? It is a cartel of 7 powerful nations. G7 is the ivory tower of power and money. It is dedicated to a single cause, ensuring that the Anglo-American West remains the biggest imperial power in the world. America, Britain, Canada, Japan, Italy, France and Germany are its members, plus the European Union. As economies, they are very influential. As governments, they are highly interventionist. The biggest corporations in the world are headquartered in the G7 countries. So are the big financial bodies, such as the World Bank and IMF. During the late 1990s, the G7 players used global economic problems as an excuse to expand their footprint. So they helped form the G20 by cherry-picking their favorite nations. And through this group of 20, G7 continues to push its own economic agenda, an agenda that has made corporate monopolies bigger and richer. Thanks to the expanding influence of G7 in the form of G20, we now have a bunch of unprecedented problems, like centralization of corporate power, rising inequality and hunger, more conflicts, and many more miseries.
G20 is a undemocratic elite club, self-selected to serve their own interests. They are not going to kind of think about the farmers or the traders or the hawkers or whatever here. I mean, it was G7, they failed in that purpose, they expanded it in G20. Again, it was self-selected, it was not any democratically elected or whatever, right? I mean, while there is a kind of a representation of the emerging economies, the shots are still being called by the big boys there, and they are the ones who are kind of taking the decision, and for their own kind of advantage. They are not going to kind of take, think about the concern of Indonesia or India, or the farmers or the fish workers in these countries before they take decision. But the unfortunate part of it is that while this 27 countries in the EU and these 19 countries take decision on behalf of the rest of the world, they are outside the discussion table. And the impacts of this decision and the recommendation is being kind of borne by these poor countries, smaller people who doesn't have any say inside. That's the level of inequality and imbalances within the system, and hence there is no way that you can kind of accept this as a legitimate body. Look at G20, the EU of 27 countries and 19 countries. This is what is going to decide about the financial architecture of this country, and about trade and about free trade agreements and all this kind of things. So we think it's a illegitimate body.
G20 summits are so disconnected from ground realities that there is a history of protests against them. Good advice from civil society groups and activists are always ignored by the G20. Well, that's because actual social issues are never their agenda. That's why protests take place wherever G20 summits happen. They happened so many times in the past. Demonstrations and boycott calls happened in Rome, in Riyadh, in Hamburg. Just last year, Indonesia banned anti-G20 protests as Bali hosted the 17th summit. Here in Delhi, at least 2.5 lakh people were impacted by evictions. Why? Because authorities have been sweeping the city clean to make it beautiful for the visitors. In fact, the authorities poured cold water on a recent gathering of civil society groups in Delhi. They had come together to raise awareness about the G20 and discuss urgent social issues. More than 500 people, including economists, activists and MPs, had assembled for a peaceful event called V20. It was scheduled for 3 days from August 18th to 20th at Surjit Bhavan in Delhi. It was organized by the Working Group on International Finance Institutions. Medha Patkar, Vandana Shiva, Jayati Ghosh, Nikhil Dey and Arun Kumar, they were among other dissident voices at V20. The plan was to hold talks and workshops on public issues like finance, banking, RTI, data surveillance and so on. But midway into the event, police were deployed at the venue and the program was cut short.
We believe in ahimsa, but if we are troubled like this, we are ready to face this struggle, we are ready to face any onslaught. This struggle will continue, this seminar will continue.
वो सरकार अच्छी है जो अपने सबसे वंचित किनारे पर लोगों की ख्याल रखती है। वो सब सरकार सबसे बुरी है जो उनको छिपाती है, भगाती है, उनकी दुख तकलीफ को दूर नहीं करती है, उनको दूर करती है। उससे बुरी कोई सरकार नहीं हो सकती है, क्योंकि सरकार बना क्यों है? बना है उनके अधिकारों के लिए। बाकी लोग तो अधिकार ले लेंगे, उनके मूलभूत संवैधानिक अधिकार के लिए ही सरकार है। और वो यदि उनको उठाएंगे, भगाएंगे, उनको दूर करेंगे, छिपाएंगे, कुछ जगह छिपा भी रहे, बड़े लंबे दीवार भी खड़े कर दें तो भी उनको लगता है। और फिर क्या कर रहे हैं, किसके साथ क्या दिखाने की कोशिश कर रहे हैं? अंत में ये सारे जो G20 जैसे चीजें भी हैं, उनको होना चाहिए कि हाँ, क्या समस्या आ रही है हमारे सामने, क्या रास्ता निकल सकता है, क्या चीजें सीधा फेस करें कि हमें कोई बड़ा चढ़ा के दिखाने से, सुंदर से कपड़े पहनाने से, अंदर जब खोखला है तो उससे क्या हम निकालेंगे। और वो आज ये हुआ, आज यहाँ इस मीटिंग को, छोटी सी मीटिंग, छोटी सी आवाज, उसको बर्दाश्त नहीं करने की क्षमता है, तो इसीलिए बंद कर दिए गए, इसीलिए अंदर नहीं जाने दिया। पूछा क्या तो कह रहे हैं कुछ परमिशन। अरे भाई, किसी बिल्डिंग में परमिशन चाहिए आपको इस सेमिनार करने के लिए? कौन सा भारत है ये, कौन सा लोकतंत्र है? तो वो भी उस छुपाने का हिस्सा है कि एक आवाज भी नहीं आए। लेकिन आवाज तो आएगी, एक नहीं कई आएंगी। और वो दिखता है कि आपका इतना खोखला है कि आप एक आवाज को ही नहीं बर्दाश्त कर सकते हैं। आप उसको सारा कुछ ऐसा सुंदर दिखाना चाहते हैं, तो आप काम नहीं कर पाएंगे लोगों के लिए। G20 आएगा, G20 जाएगा, लेकिन G20 तब फायदे में है लोगों को यदि मिलजुल के कुछ काम हो सके। और सबसे ज्यादा काम होना चाहिए सबसे तकलीफ में लोगों को।
The G20 leaders will come, have a good time and go. The mainstream media will celebrate the summit as a major milestone for Delhi, Bharat and the world. But problems like Ukraine, climate change, hunger deaths, rural districts, they will remain, if not worsen. Thanks for watching. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. Don't forget to press the bell icon so that we can notify you whenever we publish a report. Follow us on Twitter and Facebook. Send get updates to 98210-45739 for news and views you are not told. Visit our website empirediaries.com for the latest news analysis. Stay informed, stay awake, and think critically.